So I'm turning to my third topic today, which I want to briefly touch on. I called it Esper and the DOD Shake-Up. And I'll tell you, folks, many people, here we are, we had the election, which is not yet settled. And so we have somebody gets inaugurated again on January 21st, 2021. And so there's short time left. And so some people reacted not well to the decision that President Trump made, I think 2 days ago, to relieve Mark Esper of his job. And you likely recognize that name. He was, I guess, actually fired by tweet, was it? I think it was one of those, not a lot of notice and not a sit down, have a consultation to explain. But President Trump fired Secretary of Defense Mark Esper. The two things I'll mention about him before I play this clip. So John Brennan, head of CIA under Obama, we'll talk more about Brennan in a moment, but head of the CIA under Obama was interviewed on a CNN interview and talked about the question of this firing of Mark Esper. If you're thinking that name rings a bell, Esper, two quick things about him. One was, as the protests, they're not protests, riots, mayhem in the city streets of America, the murders, arson, destruction of property, just total chaos in the cities of America emerged. President Trump, as it went on and on, at some point said, we might think about using the Insurrection Act. I don't even know if he said it or it was just being talked about. But this gentleman, the former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, came out against what Trump was saying, essentially saying, I don't think the Insurrection Act is justified, which seems like you're contradicting the Commander-in-Chief, but we'll find out what John thinks about that. And then the second thing was, during one of those endless riots we've been having in our country, there were rioters who actually lit on fire a church directly across from the White House. And so President Trump and other officials, in a statement of solidarity with the American people, with the church, decided to go across the street with a film crews and stand in front of the Bible and say, we stand with this church, we stand with America, we're not going to have them burning down churches. And Mark Esper went along on that walk and then later said he really felt he shouldn't have done that. That was not appropriate, didn't think he should have done that. So now Trump has fired Esper, and maybe for those reasons and others, but I want to quick ask Matt, the very wonderful producer, to play this clip of John Brennan being interviewed by Cuomo and then on CNN, and then we'll talk about it.
It's clear that Mark Esper was removed as Secretary of Defense because he rebuffed Donald Trump's efforts to politicize the U.S. military. And I think it's quite apparent from the reporting that Mark Esper has stood up to Donald Trump repeatedly. And the Secretary of Defense position is, I think, the most consequential position in the U.S. government aside from the President of the United States. 70 days, you can do a lot of damage in 70 days. He still is the President of the United States. And is he going to carry out these vendettas against other individuals, as you pointed out, Chris Wray or Gina Haspel or others? It is clear that Donald Trump is trying to exercise the power because he can, and he is going to settle scores. But I'm very concerned what he might do in his remaining 70 days in office. Is he going to take some type of military action? Is he going to release some type of information that could, in fact, threaten our national security interests?
Okay, I actually cut off a portion I meant to include. So he actually made reference to he's afraid that Trump will release classified documents. I wonder what Brennan's worried about. Well, ask John what that might be. But then the other point was, and I'm sure I inadvertently failed to put the segment in. So Cuomo asked him, Brennan, so what is it we should do? What can the people do? And he actually said, John Brennan said, the people surrounding President Trump should consider invoking the 25th Amendment, essentially have Trump declared incompetent and take over so he can't do these things. So turning to you, I want to run through three quick questions. Number one, given your historical understanding of the things Esper has done in connection with his role, working for Trump as Secretary of Defense, do you feel he's done things that justify being let go?
Absolutely. He contradicted the President of the United States on national television. He clearly doesn't understand the war or he's a part of the problem, one or the other, meaning he's either batting for the other side or he's just ignorant about what's actually going on, or he wouldn't have made those comments he did. So yeah, I think it's absolutely appropriate he was fired. I think he should have been fired the day he made those comments.
The day he said we can't use the Insurrection Act.
That's right. And the day he retracted saying I shouldn't have gone, it was wrong for the president to do that. Shouldn't have been along there with him. He should have been fired that day.
Yeah,
so should the General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, should have been fired as well for similar comments.
Yep. Okay. So in fact, the article where I found that little clip was actually talking about essentially saying that John Brennan is really worried about classified documents. That has been one thing actually that some of Trump's supporters have been saying since the election day, when we're now in this battle over who really won the election, what was the fair outcome or the accurate outcome. Some of Trump's supporters have been saying, well, the last thing he could do before he leaves is declassify, not just authorize the release of certain documents, but declassify, order them released, certain documents that would really put out for the American people, what really happened with the Russia collusion hoax, who all was involved, what they could be possibly charged with. I mean, just all of the things that are held up by the people who seem to be or hold on to the power. So can you imagine that John Brennan would be concerned about some of the documents that Trump could release?
I am amazed at John Brennan saying he's concerned about somebody abusing their power, considering he should be in jail for being a part and, quite frankly, one of the key leaders of a coup against the President of the United States. This is a guy who admits he was a communist, who literally, while he was the CIA station chief in Saudi Arabia, said the Shahada and became a Muslim back in the 1990s. This is a guy who is a traitor. And he's guilty of sedition and treason by just evidence that's publicly known. And he was the director of the CIA. How is it that a guy could have voted for the Communist Party candidate and then been allowed to enter the CIA and then allowed to become the CIA director? That
CIA director under Obama.
Under President Obama, and it should be the key for Americans to understand how polluted these government components of government actually are with communists and jihadis.
Actually, it's interesting. He mentioned both Chris Wray, the still head of FBI, although President Trump's made some recent remarks. I think should he get his second term, Chris Wray will be short-lived in that job. Yes. And then also the head of the CIA, Gina Haspel. I forget her name. Is it P or K at her last name? Haspel? Yeah, anyway, Gina. We'll call her Gina. But she's another one very seriously viewed by people to have been part of this whole coup, this Russia collusion hoax coup that got cooked up. Brennan leaving Obama aside, Brennan appearing to be the leader, the organizer of it, but Gina Haspel right in the middle of it. He's worried about all of his buddies.
That's right. That's right. He's pulling no punches in what he's all about. Again, I would say it's just amazing that a guy like this, who literally should be in prison, number one, is given this kind of airtime, but
it is CNN.
Consider the source. And the fact that this is a guy who literally is leading the revolutionary effort. I mean, I'd put him in the top 4 of the key leadership of this revolutionary effort to bring down the republic. That's who this guy is.
Yeah, John, I haven't seen you in a while. But on this show, we've been talking a lot about how we watch in the city streets of America the violence that people claim was all due to the very unfortunate death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And so you saw violence around the country, and all of that was supposedly justified and rooted in that one incident in Minneapolis. But we have developed over many, many different shows the deeper understanding of what we're really watching in America today. We are not simply watching the traditional Republican versus Democrat, let's see who gets the most votes, campaign and election cycle. We are watching the fruition of decades of work by radical leftists in this country, whether it starts with the communists who were here in the 1920s, whenever it was, began taking over the institutions, and so our precious children leave colleges and universities thinking America bad, capitalism bad, freedom bad, socialism good, communism good. You had that whole element just take over and infect our culture and people and society. And you have people at the highest levels of power in this country who don't really say what they stand for. They say things palatable to the voters to get elected. We talked a lot about in this show, again, because we're here waiting to find the results of this election, but we talked a lot about this on this show also, the use of the issue of race in this country. In fact, there was I'll never remember the guy's name, but a great book written by an African-American gentleman in this country who joined the communist movement. Maybe one of my listeners can quick text me the guy's name again, but he was watching the growth of the communist movement in America. He heard messaging from the communists who basically had said, we're not going to win America over to communism by arguing about the beauty of socialism and communism because America's prosperous and free and so much opportunity. They won't buy these arguments. So they settled on using race, the idea of race, to where they were arguing to the American people that the country itself is very racist, somehow capitalism is racist, freedom is racist, and they got around to the point where they were bringing in black Americans, joining the communist movement, who were lured in by the promises that we're going to make things better and fairer, and we're going to stand up for the rights of black Americans. They used race to manipulate and lie to the American people about the purpose and their agenda. And so this one guy, I guess I'm not going to get this name. I have one listener who sometimes listens and texts me the guy's name. But anyway, he ended up spending, 10 years with the Communist Party. And he left and he wrote a book basically saying, I was lied to. Let me explain to you. The communists just use race. Manning Johnson, okay, my listener came through. Manning Johnson, you got to get his book. He said, I was lied to by the Communist Party, told that they're here to fight on behalf of black Americans. All they really did was use him and the argument of race to sell Marxism, socialism, communism, the destruction of the freedom of America. Well, that Communist Party that used to be clearly well known as they have no place in the American political conversation, they're just clearly outsiders, they have become mainstream in the Democrat Party in this country. When you can have a candidate like Bernie Sanders, an open, avowed, he says he's a socialist, he's pretty much a communist, ran on all sorts of platforms, clearly communist, and he nearly garnered twice, almost got the Democrat Party's nomination. He is not, and those ideas are no longer outsiders on the Democrat Party, in the Democrat Party. So we have in America, and we'll talk about this more in tomorrow's show, we have people in this country who got lured in by the media's just fomenting hatred of President Trump and ascribing guilt to him of all sorts of things which had nothing to do with it, were not his, he did not engage in that wrongdoing, but just fomented hate against President Trump. So you had American voters lured in by a party trying to sell communism, Marxism, socialism through the avenue, the vehicle of environmental arguments, racism arguments, America's unfair place arguments, economic disparities in this country. And the left in this country, the Democrat Party in this country, has now been overtaken by the radical Marxist leftist ideology that absolutely does intend to undermine the freedom and the very existence of America as a democratic republic. And many, many people are starting to wake up. Sadly, not enough people, because there were apparently some number of Americans who voted for Biden. I don't think it was really 80 million. I don't think that happened. But we are at a place where it's not just this is why we have to fight in this election period when we're trying to get through and get a resolution before the Electoral College on December 14th of the accurate vote counts, because it's not just an election this time of D versus R, liberal or conservative. It's not that at all. It's about holding on to the democratic republic as founded, or losing this country to the radical Marxist left, which now owns and is today's Democrat Party.